All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're looking at a new React hook that's got everyone talking. It's called useActionState.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic.
If you're into building really slick forms in React, especially with server components,
Right, yeah.
this deep dive is for you. Now, I know the documentation can be, well, a little bit much.
I feel that.
But don't worry, we're here to break it all down and make it easy to understand.
Absolutely.
Just to give you a taste, useActionState can actually make your forms feel interactive,
Okay,
even before all the JavaScript is fully loaded on the page.
that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty neat, huh? So let's get right into it. What's the big deal with this useActionState? Like, what problem does it solve?
So basically, it makes it a lot easier to update the state of your React component
Yeah.
based on what happens when someone submits a form. It's particularly useful when you're working with server responses because it lets you show that feedback super quickly, even before the page is, fully interactive.
So while the rest of the page is still loading, the form itself can already be, like, super responsive.
Exactly. It really makes a difference for, perceived performance. Makes things feel much snappier.
Right. Now, the documentation jumps right into a code example,
Okay.
a simple counter. I'm guessing that's just to show us the basic mechanics.
Yeah, exactly. They use a function called increment.
Okay.
And the important thing is that it's asynchronous,
Okay.
which basically means it can handle stuff that might take a little while, like sending a request to a server. It takes the previous state.
Wait, why does it need the previous state?
Oh, that's a good question.
I mean, wouldn't the data the user just typed into the form be enough?
Well, it's about how that new data from the user changes the overall state of the component, not just what they submitted.
Oh, okay. So we have this increment function, and then useActionState is called with that function.
Right.
And initial state. What happens next?
So useActionState actually gives you back three things. First, the current state, like our counter value.
Got it.
Second, a new action to use with the form.
Okay.
And third, a pending flag, which tells us if the form is in the middle of doing something.
So this action is what ties the whole thing to our form.
Exactly. It's like this special function that's just waiting for that form submission.
Gotcha.
And when the user hits submit, it triggers that increment function we talked about, which then updates the state and, can even reflect what's going on with the server immediately.
That's pretty impressive. So even before the JavaScript fully loads, the user gets that instant feedback. Makes the app feel so much faster.
Precisely.
All right, let's talk about those three parameters you feed into useActionState.
Okay.
The first one, SNN, that's our function, like increment.
Yeah.
That runs when the form is submitted.
It can be any function you want.
Okay.
That handles what should happen when the form is submitted. And remember, it gets the previous state and the form data as input, so you can use those in your logic.
The second parameter, initial state, that seems pretty simple. It's like the starting value before anything happens with the form.
Exactly. Now, the third one, permalink.
Okay, this one sounds interesting.
This is where things get especially cool when we start talking about server components. This is really important for dynamic pages and progressive enhancement.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this permalink.
Imagine you've got a page that's dynamically generated, right?
Yeah.
Like a product page with details from a server. And let's say the user submits a form.
Like adding it to their cart.
Yeah, exactly. And this happens before all the JavaScript loads. Usually the browser would just reload the whole page, and you might lose what the user entered in the form.
Not good.
No, not ideal. But with permalink, when the user submits that form, the browser is redirected to a specific URL that kind of captures the state of the page after the form is submitted. This lets the server render the page with the updated state. So even without all the JavaScript, the user sees an immediate change.
Wow, that's pretty slick. Even before the JavaScript kicks in, the user gets that sense that their action, like adding to the cart, has been registered.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference. And that's where progressive enhancement comes in. Permalink, combined with server components, makes sure the core functionality works even before the full JavaScript experience is loaded.
This is giving me a whole new appreciation for how powerful server components can be.
They really do change the game.
This has been awesome so far. We've covered the basics of useActionState, how it works with server components, and this really cool permalink parameter.
Yeah, I think we've got a good foundation now.
Definitely. I'm excited to see how all this plays out in more real-world scenarios. Like, how does useActionState handle things like error messages or dynamic content? Ready to jump into that?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so we've got the basics down. Now, I'm curious, how does this all work in a real-world scenario? Can you
Sure.
give me an example that goes beyond, like, a simple counter?
Absolutely. Let's imagine you're building an e-commerce site
Yeah,
and you want to show potential errors during checkout, like if a credit card is declined or an item is out of stock.
right. Makes sense.
That's where use action state can be really helpful.
Okay, I see. So how would useActionState handle that kind of situation?
So you'd have your place order button on your checkout page.
Yeah.
And with use action state, you'd define a function, let's call it place order, that does all the work of sending the order to the server and processing the response.
So place order would be our env parameter,
Exactly.
like the action that's triggered when the form is submitted.
Yep. Now, this function, it could get different kinds of responses back from the server,
Okay.
including error messages. Like if the credit card is declined,
Yeah.
the server might send back something like invalid card number.
Right, right. And so useActionState would grab that error message and make it available to us.
Exactly. It puts it right into your component state.
Okay, I see.
And then you can use that state to show a user-friendly message on the checkout page, like, hey, there was a problem with your card, please try again.
Oh, that's really nice. So instead of writing all this extra code to handle those errors, useActionState just takes care of it.
Pretty much. It really simplifies things. And remember, because of the way use action state works with server components and permalink, this error handling can happen really fast, even before the whole page is loaded.
Right. So even if there's a bit of a delay loading the checkout page, the user still gets instant feedback if there's a problem with their order.
It makes the whole experience much smoother.
Definitely. Okay, so we've talked about errors.
Mm-hmm.
What about handling dynamic content? Like, how does useActionState help us there?
So think about pages with stuff that changes a lot.
Like news feeds or social media?
Exactly. That's where progressive enhancement is super important. You want to make sure the core functionality of the page works, even if the JavaScript isn't fully loaded, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So let's go back to that permalink parameter. When a form is submitted on a page with useActionState and the JavaScript isn't quite ready yet,
Uh-huh.
the browser goes to that permalink URL instead of just reloading the page.
So it's kind of like a fallback mechanism.
Exactly. And with server components, the server can actually pre-render the page with the updated state.
Okay, can you walk me through a specific example?
Sure. Let's say you have a news website with comment sections,
Okay.
and a user submits a comment. Now, even if their JavaScript isn't fully loaded yet, the permalink ensures that their comment is processed.
So the server would handle the comment submission, update the page to include the new comment,
Yeah,
and show that updated view to the user all before the JavaScript is fully active.
exactly. Then, as the JavaScript loads, it can seamlessly take over and provide the full interactive experience, like replies and editing.
Wow, that's really cool. It's like having two layers of functionality.
Yeah.
A basic server-rendered layer and a more enhanced JavaScript layer, all working together to provide a smooth experience no matter the user's connection.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've seen how useActionState works in different situations, from handling errors to making dynamic content work smoothly. Is there anything else we should cover?
Well, it's important to remember that use action state is still fairly new,
Mm.
and we're still figuring out the best ways to use it. As more people try it out and share what they learn, we'll keep discovering new and exciting possibilities.
Yeah, it's like any new tool, it takes time to really master it.
Absolutely. But the key takeaway here is that use action state is a really powerful addition to React, especially when you combine it with server components. It gives you a new level of control over form state, error handling, and the overall user experience.
I'm excited to see what people build with it.
Me too. I think it has the potential to become the standard way to build forms in React.
I gotta say, as excited as I am about useActionState, it can seem a little intimidating at first. You know, there's server components, permalink, these asynchronous actions. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It's definitely a different way of thinking about things, especially for folks used to the old ways of doing form submissions. But the good news is, once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite elegant and intuitive.
Okay, so for someone who's just hearing about this for the first time, what's the key takeaway? What's like the simplest way to think about useActionState?
The core idea is this: you write a function that handles what should happen when your form is submitted. That's your action. You give this function and your initial state to use action state, and it gives you back the current state and this special action to use with your form.
So instead of directly connecting our form to a regular function, we connect it to this special action the useActionState gives us.
Exactly. And if you're using server components and want that instant feedback before all the JavaScript loads, you just need to add the permalink parameter.
So it's like useActionState is acting as this intermediary, right? Intercepting the form submission and making sure the right things happen on both the server and the client side.
That's a great way to think about it. It's orchestrating the whole process to keep things smooth and efficient.
You mentioned a paradigm shift earlier.
Hmm.
Do you think useActionState is really going to change how we build forms in React?
I think it has the potential to, yeah. It makes state management easier, error handling cleaner, and it just works so well with server components. It just makes sense.
Wow, that's a big statement. I'm almost wondering if it's too good to be true. Are there any gotchas or downsides that people should watch out for?
One thing to be mindful of is the order of arguments passed to that action function. With useActionState, the previous state actually comes before the form data,
Oh, okay.
which can be a little confusing if you're not used to it.
Right, yeah, that's a subtle but important detail. Could lead to some head scratching if you're not careful.
Exactly. But the React documentation does a good job of pointing that out.
And as we mentioned earlier, this whole ecosystem is still developing, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's always more to learn as people come up with new patterns and best practices.
Absolutely. The React community is great, lots of helpful folks out there, so don't hesitate to check out blog posts, tutorials, all that good stuff to learn more about useActionState.
Well said. So to wrap up this deep dive, I have one final question for you and for our listeners out there.
Okay, shoot.
Now that you know how to use useActionState, what kind of dynamic, user-friendly forms can you imagine building? What possibilities does this open up? The beauty of React is that it gives you the power to create some truly innovative and interactive experiences.
I think that's the most exciting part. The possibilities are really endless.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into useActionState. Until next time, keep exploring, keep building, and keep pushing the limits of what's possible with React.